Hi guys, this is Jen and I make useful English Lit study videos on Shakespeare, poetry, fiction, literary concepts and more to help you become a literary expert. So I recently hosted an essay contest where I asked you guys to submit a 700-word essay on any text that you're studying at school or are currently preparing for your exams. So I'm really grateful to have received lots of fantastic entries. And I just want to say once again here, a massive thank you to everyone who had participated for your interest and time. I know you guys must have spent a lot of time crafting your essays, and I am truly appreciative of that. So well done on the amazing effort, whether or not you have won, and keep up the hard and good work in preparation for your exams and also, of course, going forward in your studies. So as I reviewed everyone's writing, I noticed a couple of recurring pitfalls that students tend to fall into. So in this video, I'd like to point out 3 of the most common essay writing pitfalls that I have observed from everyone's writing and, of course, over the years from students' work, so that we can start addressing them and hopefully avoid them completely in our future essays, or at least avoid them to the best of our ability. Because the first step to improvement is always self-awareness. So one of the biggest problems that I find with some student essays is that the points don't really flow or relate to each other in a logical or organic manner. So take the classic point evidence explanation PEE framework. If the main idea of our paragraph is that, for example, the witches in Macbeth are responsible for his downfall, then the evidence that we source must be moments or quotations which present the witches as influencing Macbeth or Macbeth reflecting on how the witches have impacted his mind and actions. Then our analysis or explanation must establish a clear link between the literary technique in the quotation that we have sourced and, most importantly, explain how this technique strengthens our understanding of the idea that we're discussing. So to illustrate what I mean by this, compare the following 2 paragraphs. So as you see in paragraph 1, each sentence follows on from the previous one in a logical way. After the student brings in the quotation of Macbeth's 3 questions, she points out the techniques, i.e. the tone and the syntax, and proposes what these techniques tell her about Macbeth's psychology at this point in the play. She then delves deeper into how this psychology eventually sets off the engine of Macbeth's fall from grace. So you see that all the links between the sentences in the paragraph are all tight and clear, and they relate to each other. Now compare this with paragraph 2, where the student does bring in a quotation and she does identify the techniques, for example, in the repetition and the tricolon, but she follows on with an explanation that doesn't really relate to the technique, right? How does the repetition of the witches' all hail, all hail, all hail Macbeth chant suggest that Macbeth will become king? What's the relationship between the chant and what happens to Macbeth? And also, she's not really illustrating the paragraph's main idea, i.e., she's supposed to be showing how does this repeated all hail chant lead to Macbeth's eventual downfall. So you see that in this paragraph, the links are disjointed, which makes for a weak and confusing argument. And that's definitely something that we want to avoid for sure. Now, I see lots of essays where students tend to just shove in context into their paragraphs, kind of like an afterthought, and just kind of throwing it at the end of the paragraph. So the pattern that I've observed is that students will have written up their entire analysis of the quotation and then kind of hastily conclude with a piece of historical factual information that's kind of maybe thinly related to the point. But the problem is that most of the time, it either doesn't really relate to the main idea or the student hasn't really done enough to show how the context deepens their understanding of the idea that they're discussing. For instance, take a look at this paragraph, which is adapted from an otherwise pretty good student essay on Wordsworth's The Prelude. Now, notice how the final sentence in this paragraph kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. By the way, guys, if you find this video helpful so far, I'd massively appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any of my top grade lit study content going forward. I'd also encourage you to check out my membership program by clicking the join button below if you want exclusive access to members only study content and make special video requests. I'll see you there. So we know that Wordsworth is commonly accepted as a romantic poet and that he did often write about the superiority of nature over the destructive forces of industrialism, etc. But the thing is, why does any of this information relate to our analysis in the paragraph? Again, it's about establishing the relationship between your context and your analysis and linking it all logically to the poem. So the student wanted to make a point about the conflict between nature and industrialism, then she could have done so more effectively by bringing in perhaps another more relevant quotation that is about industrial concepts, such as the other line in the poem, which reads, "My little boat moved on, even like a man who walks with stately step, though bent on speed." So the idea here is that being bent on speed is symbolic of the sort of technological progress that was brought on by the Industrial Revolution. Anyway, that's just a quick illustration of how to at least just make the context relate to the analysis. So at the end of the day, context alone doesn't really do much or anything, to be honest, to help your essay, unless we are able to establish a clear, logical, and convincing argument about how the context relates to, and even better, how it elevates our analysis. Now, to see how you can do this effectively, watch my Macbeth or Othello context videos here. Now, my third and final point is speaking to the more ambitious ones among you, which ambition is good, by the way, but there are caveats that we should heed. So sometimes when we get it in our heads that we need to impress the examiner or teacher and flex all that we know and have prepared for as quickly as possible, we tend to overwhelm ourselves and the person on the other end reading our essay by doing way too much, way too quickly. So I read quite a few essays that you guys had submitted, which started off by introducing 3 ideas just in the first sentence. And there was one student who was really ambitious and tried to frame her argument with Freudian, Jungian, and Nietzschean theory all in one paragraph. Other students tried to stuff their analysis with lots of big words and subject terminology, but again, there's little use to pointing out examples of metonymy, synecdoche, stichomythia, or chiasmus without also giving strong explanations of how these techniques aid and strengthen our understanding of the text. And often, if we try to include too many literary techniques all in one go, we might miss the wood for the trees, i.e., we might compromise the depth of our analysis for the breadth of the terminology that we can bring in. And don't forget, especially when it comes to an examined condition, there's always the issue of time constraint and the importance of time management, which, by the way, you can watch my video on this here. I just want you guys to remember the golden rule is to make the experience of reading your essay as comfortable and unconfusing for your teacher or examiner as possible. And so overloading our essay with information is just not the way to do it. Being selective about what and what not to include in our essays is also a super important skill to master. So remember, instead of going for quantity and thinking that the more information you include, the better your essay, focus on the quality and depth of your argument and analysis. And we can do that by keeping it simple and remembering that less is always more. We can stick to, for example, one idea per paragraph and include no more than 2 solid quotations and techniques as our supporting analysis. Always remember, less is more, keep it simple. And that's going to make your life and the examiner's life much better at the end of the day. And of course, ultimately lead to higher grades. And there you have it, guys. Just to recap, in order to write a top grade lit essay, we have to make sure that A, our sentences and paragraphs link together logically and organically, B, that we show how context deepens and illuminates our analysis instead of just shoving it in as an afterthought kind of piece of information. And finally, less is more, stick to one solid idea per paragraph and only use as much evidence and terminology as is necessary for you to explain the idea. So for your next video, I recommend that you watch this one right here on 4 tips for time management in essay writing, which is going to be super useful if you're about to do any sort of essay-based exam for English or any other subjects that's relevant. So anyway, if you found these tips helpful, please do hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe if you haven't already. It always encourages me to keep going and to create more useful study content for you all. Thanks for watching as always, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!